A shutter clicks in 1881. A young actor sits. The King of Bavaria stands. Etiquette flinches because the photograph reverses a throne room's grammar with one simple pose. Could a single image printed on cardstock threaten rituals more than any whispered rumor? Copies travel quietly. Ministers stop smiling. Courtiers measure distance with their eyes, not their feet. The picture feels like a confession without words, and protocol suddenly looks fragile, even theatrical. Contemporary accounts differ on details, but everyone agrees the breach was unmistakable and dangerous. 5 years later, on Lake Starnberg, two bodies surface and a monarchy changes narrator. A doctor bears marks on his neck. A swimmer king lies close by in silence. Files go missing. Testimonies conflict, and certainty recedes behind seals, fires, and tidy communiques. Short term, the court learns fear. Long term, Bavaria learns tourism. Truth learns how to disappear. The immediate consequence is motion. Committees convene, diagnoses are drafted, and loyalty becomes an exam. From here, the trail rewinds to first looks and first letters, where habits were born. Begin in Munich, beer lit and watchful, when a teenage prince met a smile that altered gravity. There, desire met surveillance, and a life moved gently from daylight into a careful night. Munich, 1863. Theater lights fade, and a prince notices Paul von Thurn on taxis. A glance becomes visits, visits become letters. Some survive, some vanish in tidy, frightened flames. What does a young royal learn when affection must outrun gossip in a city of toasts? He learns handwriting as armor, errand routes as alibis, and pauses long enough to hear footsteps. Friends become intermediaries, servants become risks, benches in gardens become classrooms for discretion and code. Later memoirs argue about tone and frequency. Evidence is fragmentary, so bravado deserves skepticism. Still, a pattern forms: warmth in private, stagecraft in public, and watchfulness everywhere in between. The boy discovers nights are kinder. Daylight prints questions onto every gesture like stubborn watermarks. Beer halls amplify rumors. Couriers trim stories. Names are shortened to initials inside leather journals. Affection grows, then stalls. Departures follow. Loss teaches routine, and routine matures into strategy. Near consequence, the heart learns to live after midnight, where servants change shifts and clocks forgive. That new rhythm will shape rooms, schedules, and castles, turning privacy into a new kind of power. Next comes the crown at 18 and an engagement to Sophie, expectations tightening like ceremonial gloves. Those gloves will tear, and the tear will usher in companions, doubts, and an expensive conscience. 18 brings a crown, a schedule, and a choreography the body doesn't choose. Ministers propose an answer to rumor: marry Sophie, the tidy solution in a blue sash. What happens when dynasty demands daylight while desire has already learned the grammar of night? Engagement notices travel, congratulations arrive. The prince-turned-king rehearses a future that misfits his pulse. Diaries and letters suggest warmth and worry in equal measure. Official memos stay antiseptically polite. Rehearsal breaks, the match dissolves. Sophie departs with dignity that newspapers translate into gossip. The lesson bites. Love equals loss, and visibility invites management by people you don't trust. So the clock pivots. Audiences slip later, rides begin after sunset, and dinners migrate across midnight. Opera becomes sanctuary, correspondence narrows, staff learn that closed curtains mean not now, not ever. Immediate consequence. Alliances bruise, tongues sharpen, and the court reads nightfall as either romance or retreat. The king calls it survival, discovering that silence after 2 a.m. carries fewer judges and clearer air. Historians caution against tidy motives. Evidence is patchy, but the nocturnal pattern settles like habit. Could a throne tolerate a heart that refuses daylight's terms without rewriting the calendar around it? That rewrite needs enablers, discreet riders, trusted hands, and someone whose job description includes loyalty. Enter a horseman with modest rank and steady nerves, the kind of shadow a king can use. Richard Hornig arrives with saddles, schedules, and a face trained not to register surprise. Lower status looks like camouflage. Errands pass as duty, and proximity explains itself to gossips. Can intimacy hide in plain sight when every hoofprint and lantern is logged by someone else? Travel notes, stable accounts, and guard rosters survive. Private pages do not, a sober editorial caution. Rides stretch later, detours multiply, messages change hands without ink that lawmakers could later quote. The king writes of discipline and temptation, alternating generosity with private vows of self reproach. Hunting trips become moving rooms, carriages become confessionals, inns practice the art of forgetting for a price. Immediate consequence: secrecy gains muscle, routes memorized, aliases rehearsed, and gifts coded as equipment or repairs. Hornig steadies the orbit. He knows which doors stick and which footsteps always arrive early. One careless servant, however, can turn routine into rumor. Loyalty remains human, not architectural. Would rank protect or expose a liaison that crosses class, duty, and the geometry of power? Receipts and whispers accumulate until even silence acquires a shape administrators can recognize. Patterns like these demand geography, a place built to host them without witnesses or alibis. That vision rises in stone on a ridge, a castle designed not for court, but for concealment. Next comes Neuschwanstein, a fortress of fantasy where privacy attempts to harden into policy. Neuschwanstein rises like a fairy tale, but its blueprint whispers practical secrecy everywhere. Corridors kink, doors double back, and stairways slip behind panels trimmed for legend. A throne niche exists, yet the actual seat was never fixed into place. What kind of castle refuses a throne while welcoming rehearsals of privacy at scale? Bedrooms face views, not audiences. Galleries curve to swallow footsteps and scatter echoes. Service routes braid through rock, letting food and messages appear without visible origin. Windows frame lakes and crags, but shutters secure alibis when coaches climb after midnight. Visitors gasped at murals. Residents memorized turns that trusted hands alone could navigate. Ministers called it vanity. The floor plan reads like policy, written in stone. Meetings moved elsewhere into rooms designed for daylight politics rather than midnight logistics. Short term, secrecy thickened. Long term, distance hardened between government, household, and heart. Neuschwanstein solved immediate discretion while amplifying the suspicion discretion always seems to generate. Could architecture save a private life without teaching enemies exactly where to look? The answer deepened at night when schedules inverted and servants learned the moon's timetable. From stone to hours, the kingdom shifted toward darkness, preparing a theater only darkness understood. Candles replace clocks. Appointments begin when courtiers yawn. Letters are answered after 2. Music rehearses late. Lake water glows under stars. The household learns a different sunrise. Can a monarch govern by moonlight without inviting rumors to govern by day? Carriages roll at odd hours. Watchmen sign receipts. Lantern boys memorize silent routes. Musicians, cooks, and grooms rotate shifts. Overtime becomes loyalty paid in untraceable favors. Ministers complain of missed audiences, petitions stack, decisions drift into margins, no gazette prints. Near result, privacy blooms. Farther result, statecraft atrophies into notes, proxies, and speculative briefings. Friends thrive who can endure silence. Enemies thrive who can narrate silence for others. Skeptics name it eccentricity. Loyalists call it refuge. Both descriptions miss the structural redesign. Routines migrate from open salons into managed dimmer rooms that select their own witnesses. Would daylight have been safer or merely louder for a life that needed discretion? The king calls the schedule honest. The world calls it odd. Neither label changes necessity. This nightly republic requires scenery. Rooms that float, lights that shift, music behind stone. Enter the grotto, a private theater disguised as geology, tuned for secrecy and spectacle. There, electricity paints water blue, then crimson, while doors learn to vanish on cue. Rock glistens like a stage set. A hidden pump sends ripples across a private pool. Electric lamps wash the cavern in blue, then crimson, then hush back to candlelight. Is secrecy easier to keep when walls pretend to be mountains and ceilings drip on cue? Musicians play behind a false cliff. A skiff waits, lacquered and low, for slow circuits under stars. A switch kills color at a knock. Doors blend into seams. Footsteps lose their echo. The grotto flatters intimacy. Water muffles talk. And spectacle explains why hours turn elastic. Contemporaries disagreed whether this was art, retreat, or evidence. The archive is theatrical, yet incomplete. Immediate result: meetings feel untraceable, framed by noise that looks like nature and sounds like myth. Longer result: engineers, electricians, and favored staff now hold fragments of a map outsiders want. Every system breeds witnesses. The trick is paying witnesses who understand when to forget. That calculus grows expensive. Stipends expand, gifts multiply, and silence starts to look like payroll. Could a cave built for privacy also echo into ledgers where enemies love to read? When wonder needs maintenance, bills itemize wonder, and itemized wonder invites questions with sharp teeth. From light and water, we surface into corridors where wages, whispers, and bitter exits accumulate. Next comes the economy of secrecy. Retainers rewarded, servants dismissed, and stories priced by resentment. Ledgers thicken. Bonuses for discretion, pensions for old loyalty, gifts written down as household needs. Silence is hired, but silence has moods, and departures learn to write after midnight. What happens when a disgruntled footman translates routine into choreography, adding velvet where memory is thin? Complaints describe midnight dances, coded visitors, and doors that know too many names by heart. Editors adore such copy. Ministers accept it as confirmation of worries they already nurture. Historians warn that motives bend testimony, evidence is fragmentary, and wording swells in retellings. Immediate consequence: inquiries sprout, watchers multiply. The household breathes shorter under eyes that never blink. Longer consequence: rumor becomes infrastructure, ferrying suspicion between offices faster than carriages can roll. Lists of gifts become exhibits. Gratitude becomes leverage. Yes becomes currency. Others spend for you. Could generosity buy peace if generosity itself proves the story everyone wants to sell? The budget creaks, the mood curdles, an audience that once clapped now counts receipts instead. And into this charged theater steps a new fascination: talented, young, and inconveniently photogenic. A journey under an alias points toward Switzerland, where candor and curiosity briefly share a table. There, an actor named Joseph Kainz meets a king who has learned how to vanish. Their paths will cross a lens, and the lens will do what witnesses could not. Next, the introductions end, and the camera begins, setting up the image that undid protocol. A carriage leaves at dusk. The guest list shrinks. An alias appears on tickets. Joseph Kainz is quick on stage and quicker in conversation, funny, precise, disarming. What happens when a lonely monarch meets a talent who thrives under lights and laughter? Introductions feel effortless. Late suppers stretch. A private tour becomes a small conspiracy of schedules. Innkeepers learn to forget names. Drivers learn shortcuts. Bills drift toward household ledgers without signatures. Letters remain sparse. Diaries hint. Theater programs place Kainz here, then there, like breadcrumbs. Historians note the gaps. Timelines overlap, but certainty frays where witnesses had reasons to be vague. Still, a pattern hardens. Evenings together, rehearsals attended, and rides that return just before dawn. Gifts appear. Books, flowers, perhaps a ring, explained away as patronage, the court's most flexible euphemism. Immediate result: warmth, momentum, and a circle of staff who suddenly value discretion more dearly. Longer result: photographs become possible, because actors know cameras and kings know what they risk. Could fame and solitude negotiate a truce in a world where ritual polices posture and glance? For a moment, yes, until a lens intrudes with its own unforgiving etiquette. A meeting near water, a studio in transit, and a chair that should not be offered. There, the image forms quietly, as if it were only another souvenir of travel. And that image will teach protocols to panic, because a chair is never just a chair. A stool is placed, the actor sits, the king remains standing, composed, and attentive. The camera accepts this grammar, and in accepting it, writes a sentence ministers can read. Can a photograph dethrone ritual simply by freezing an exception that everyone understands at once? Copies multiply discreetly. Couriers hesitate. A quiet network ferries shock toward offices with heavy doors. No caption accuses. Posture does. The monarchy's theater blinks in bright chemical daylight. Some later accounts embroider scenes. Others minimize. The archive is spirited but uneven, a fair caution. Still, context is plain. Deference reversed, intimacy implied, and legitimacy asked to explain itself quickly. Immediate consequence: confidants turn anxious, staff are questioned, and the king's schedule grows more carefully nocturnal. Longer consequence: adversaries gather receipts, gifts, wages, travel notes, until narrative feels simpler than truth. The picture becomes shorthand in meetings, eyebrows do the talking, euphemism becomes policy in minutes. Could damage be contained if the original were burned, or had the idea already escaped? Ideas move faster than fires. Posture cannot be recalled once it circulates as memory. Holnstein, veteran of corridors and committees, begins to compile an index of worries and proofs. Lists form. Statements are drafted. Sympathy hardens into strategy measured in affidavits and seals. The next act opens in offices, not theaters, where evidence is arranged like furniture, and at the head of the table sits a diagnosis that arrives without examination. Count Holnstein opens drawers, interviews servants, and asks jewelers for duplicate invoices. Receipts for flowers become exhibits. Pensions become inducements. Private nicknames turn into coded aliases. When does documentation become narrative? Evidence or merely interpretation wearing a uniform and a seal? Affidavits gather from dismissed staff. Diaries are borrowed. A clerk copies travel notes into neat columns. Meetings rehearse euphemism, eccentric, unapproachable, unfit. The translation reads, inconvenient to ministries with deadlines. The grotto appears in minutes as symptom. Nocturnal hours become pathology. Patronage is reframed as bribery. Editors would later quarrel over motives. Our caution stands, sources are partial, and memories learn politics. Immediate consequence, a dossier thick enough to wobble a table, time to the next cabinet session. Lists harden into steps. Appoint examiners, draft a declaration, alert the regent in waiting to keep the pen warm. Holnstein knows the law prefers categories. To move a king, you must first rename his habits. Could a file cabinet accomplish what rumors never could? Convert discomfort into procedure and procedure into force? In hallways that smell of ink, a medical opinion becomes the safest battering ram. One signature can do what a riot cannot, and one name is already circulating. Bernhard von Gutten, respected and decisive, is invited to read the man by reading the paper. Next, the diagnosis travels faster than the patient, and judgment arrives without an examination room. Gutten receives statements, schedules, and architectural notes, then sketches a mind he has not met. Nocturnal living translates as disorder. Seclusion becomes suspicion. Grand projects read like delusion by ledger light. Can you diagnose a sovereign from hearsay, floor plans, and the tempo of his mail? Colleagues confer, language tightens. A certificate takes shape that makes arrest sound like care. The king's refusals to meet are filed as proof. Courtiers call it prudence. Doctors call it symptom. Editorially, this is where documentation outruns ethics. Still, the machinery moves with polished certainty. Immediate consequence. Papers for incapacity are readied, a regency is rehearsed, orders for custody are drafted. Guards revise duty rosters, carriages are assigned, a destination named Berg waits behind polite curtains. The court whispers about kindness, the timetable argues for speed, dignity is promised in the passive voice. Could a delayed consultation have changed anything, or had the narrative already replaced the patient? Bavaria wakes to bulletins. Allies look at their shoes, enemies look at their watches. By the week's end, doors will open on command and a king will lose his keys. The calendar turns to June, where declarations are read and routes to the lake are planned. On June 10th, signatures bloom. By June 12th, the household is a ward with better furniture. And at Berg, a meeting between doctor and sovereign will end with a walk by the water. June 10th reads like a script. Incapacity declared, a regency rehearsed, couriers dispatched. Orders reach doorways before breakfast. Keys change hands, loyalists discover their titles suddenly weigh less. Where does a dethroned sovereign go when palace and parliament both decline to host him? Newspapers speak softly, corridors speak louder. Berg Castle waits with curtains drawn and lamps trimmed. Carriages fan out, guards practice kindness. The move is labeled medical rather than political. Rumor adds embroidery, a carriage near the Austrian border, a cousin ready to intervene. Accounts differ. Some plans existed, others were bravado. History keeps its poker face here. Telegrams slow, visitors are screened, diaries skip lines as schedules collapse into custody. Near effect, the court breathes easier on paper. In rooms, everyone whispers shorter syllables. Far effect, power reassigns itself to signatures, seals, and the men who carry them. The king travels by night, not as he prefers, but as protocol now requires. He watches lake water through glass and asks the oldest royal question, who decides my hours? June 12th turns the household into a ward with better upholstery and impeccable views. Could dignity survive in a place designed to blend nursing with surveillance and velvet? The answer waits inside Berg, where labels promise care and schedules practice control. Next, the doctor finally meets the patient, and a castle becomes a very quiet clinic. Berg sits above the water, furnished like comfort and timed like custody. Windows face the lake. Doors learn new locks, attendants, new phrases that mean not today. Can a medical ward exist without consent when consent is the controversy itself? Gudin arrives certain. The king receives him chilled, polite, and unimpressed by distant paperwork. Notes are taken, hands are not examined, schedules, not symptoms, anchor the brief conversation. Guards wait in the corridor, servants hover, every cough seems to take attendance. Letters are dictated, then paused, messengers are vetted, news arrives, trimmed of its edges. Short term, protocol steadies nerves. Long term, it empties rooms of witnesses who might complicate clarity. Meals are punctual, walks discussed, supervision negotiated like tariff lines on a map. The patient asks about tomorrow. The doctor prescribes patience. Everyone else studies the carpet. Would another hour of candor have changed anything? Or had the week already decided? Outside, the lake practices evening, pretending to be innocent of what mornings reveal. Inside, talk turns practical. Fresh air, a stroll, and rest to follow after dusk. It sounds humane, almost ordinary, and therefore gains the consent ceremony always needs most. Preparations conclude with a nod. The house grows quiet. The path to the shore is cleared. Next, a walk begins with two figures and returns without voices, only water and clocks. Evening gathers. Two men leave the castle. Attendants are told to keep their distance. They walk beside reeds and shallow water, speaking softly while the lake mirrors a pale sky. What changes when supervision relaxes for kindness, and kindness leaves a path without witnesses? A shower passes, twilight thickens. The park grows quiet except for oars and birds. 8 o'clock becomes 9 in anxious whispers. Lamps appear, searchers split along the shore. By night's end, bodies are found in the shallows, faces turned away from the house. One neck bears scraping marks, pockets are checked, hands are arranged with professional, uneasy care. Two watches stop at two different moments, a riddle that files will later learn by heart. Statements begin in overlapping rooms, servants sign, officers practice sentences that comfort more than clarify. Immediate consequence. Shock becomes paperwork. A nation exhales, then inhales, questions it cannot politely voice. Editorially, chronology soon outruns certainty. The scene hardens while explanations remain tender and conflicting. Candles burn low at Berg. Elsewhere, pens sharpen. The morning will favor a usable story. Could coincidence carry both men into water, or had a plan simply borrowed the twilight? The official narrative assembles before breakfast, clean, quick, and allergic to loose ends or stray adjectives. Its seams will show under daylight, pointing toward missing items, strange injuries, and rumors with teeth. Next, the tidy version meets its untidy margins, and those margins begin to multiply. Morning bulletins prefer one arc, a struggle, a pursuit, and a drowning that resolves everything. Later notes introduce grit. No water in lungs in some accounts, others keep the detail vague. Can a single lake hold both an accident and evidence that refuses to behave on cue? The doctor bears fingernail marks. A coat is unaccounted for. Witnesses disagree about shouts across water. One fisherman prospers soon after. A promotion follows. Private papers hint he heard a shot. Editors debate reliability. Memories grow obedient to power. Our caution stands where archives will not open. Immediate consequence. The public receives closure. Private rooms collect contradictions that leak slowly into rumor. Forensics speak softly here. Methods were limited. Certainty often arrived pre-written on ministerial stationery. Officials prefer the phrase tragic. Courtiers prefer silence. Both evade questions that survive in families for decades. Would a thorough autopsy have ended speculation, or only relocated it to locked drawers and sealed boxes? The lake keeps its voice. The castle keeps its staff. Bavaria keeps its version that travels well. Meanwhile, motive is argued in ledgers as much as letters, debts, palaces, and networks of discretion. Near cost was 2 deaths. Deeper cost, a story that still recruits listeners and skeptics alike. Those skeptics point past numbers toward secrets that crossed rank and made enemies among practiced moralists. The next room holds reasons, whispered and written, for why a crown might be safer empty. From outcomes, we pivot to motives. Money on paper and knowledge in people who could talk. Ledgers list palaces like poems, then total columns that read more like verdicts. Contractors want payment, ministries want restraint, creditors want schedules that politics cannot honor. Was debt the motive, or merely the pretext a nervous cabinet could say aloud? Millions of marks hung over projects. Schedules slipped. Winter budgets arrived already limping. Yet the sharper threat lived in people, not paper, names, habits, and private geographies. A king who moved by night knew who else moved by night, and where. Such knowledge ages into leverage, even if it never crosses a desk in daylight. The photograph suggested intimacy. The ledger suggested pressure. Together they suggested futures some men feared. Editorially, motives rarely travel alone. Evidence is patchy, and tidy villains belong to theater. Immediate result? Urgency hardens, procedure accelerates. Care becomes the word that escorts force politely. Longer result, a plan forms that solves money, silences rumor, and averts confessions no court could stage. Could a crown be safer empty than worn by someone who remembered too much? In that calculus, compassion loses to caution, and diagnosis becomes the cleanest signature available. The move to Berg follows. The lake waits. The story seeks an ending without witnesses. Endings rarely stay ended, so the next chapter begins with a different kind of housekeeping. Papers will be gathered, rooms sealed, and lives redirected into footnotes that refuse to sit still. After the lake, clerks arrive with boxes, seals thump, inventories learn new, shorter entries. Private papers are confiscated, some vanish, others reappear decades later with edges too neat. Can silence protect reputations when every locked drawer becomes a rumor with better shoes? Rooms are closed for maintenance. The grotto sleeps under dust. Servants transfer or retire early. A trusted writer leaves the record. A charismatic actor leaves the province and grows. Letters lose names. Diaries grow careful. Recollections align with salaries or the lack of them. Immediate result: fewer witnesses, fewer leaks, and a palace that exhales like a stage after curtain. Longer result: legend recruits aggressively, filling gaps with certainties sold by pamphlet and dinner talk. Historians later warn about motive and memory. Our caution stands where archives will not open. Gifts are recoded as evidence, friendships as plots, and music as background to conspiracy. Could a bonfire of papers erase meaning, or only feed it shadows and warmth to breed? While secrecy tightens indoors, another arithmetic stirs. Tickets, tours, postcards, and scaffolds for careful restorations. The castles remain. Accounts change. What was scandal becomes scenery with excellent acoustics for cameras. Ministers discover that fantasy pays debts more reliably than budgets ever did in life. That discovery sets the stage for economics, where sorrow converts into revenue and policy. Next, stone and story merge into commerce, and Bavaria learns a new, profitable definition of memory. Turnstiles click, shutters chorus, coaches become shuttle buses for dreamers with day tickets. Castles that once hid a life now sell viewpoints, echoes, and model shop miniatures by the tray. Can scandal be amortized into postcards, tours, and a gift shop that never runs out? Guides memorize anecdotes, restorers chase leaks, ticketing systems turn summer into a beautifully managed queue. Immediate result: deficits soften, payrolls return, maintenance moves from crisis to calendar and tender. Longer result: memory converts to merchandise, and controversy becomes a brand with remarkable stamina. Economics prefers clarity. Open hours, timed entries, season passes, where history keeps its favorite ambiguities intact. Photographers frame balconies, filmmakers borrow silhouettes, brochures polish a narrative tourists can carry home. Invoices smile more steadily than ministries once did. Fantasy finally pays what fantasy once cost. A paradox stands in perfect focus. A secretive king fuels an industry of looking. Editorial caution still applies. Numbers vary by year and source, and triumphal graphs skip messy footnotes. But the pattern is visible. Spectacle stabilized the budget, even while questions kept their voice. Would the man who avoided cameras approve of crowds rehearsing his legends under steady autofocus? The answer is unknowable. The crowds are not. Image rules the economy that stone began. From money, we pivot back to meaning. How a single pose outran policy and armored rumor. Next, the grammar of deference meets photography's grammar, and etiquette discovers it can be photographed breaking. Protocol choreographs height, hands, gaze, and distance. Photographs fix those decisions into permanent verbs. A seat invites deference. A standing figure grants it. Exchange those roles, and captions write themselves. What happens when etiquette, the last wall around secrecy, cracks inside a frame anyone can mail? Painters once rescued hierarchies by editing. Cameras seldom negotiate, especially with chairs and eye lines. Ministers needed no scandal sheet, posture sufficed, the picture carried inference like a seal. Immediate result: language hardened to policy, eccentric graduated to unfit, and paper began to march. Longer result: a demonstration that images outrun hearings and rituals cannot litigate what the lens implies. Editorially, beware neat villains. Context is untidy. Yet the photograph reorganized priorities faster than debates. It also revealed the soft power of small decisions: who sits, who stands, who holds, whose gaze. Ritual defends opacity, images prefer daylight. The two became rivals in a century learning speed. Could protocol have survived by ignoring the print, or was silence already read as confirmation? In that silence, allies faltered, adversaries synchronized, diagnosis arrived, like grammar pretending to be medicine. A single pose thus became a fulcrum, prying open doors that petitions only rattled. Which brings us to a sentence attributed to an empress who understood theater and danger. She named the motive not madness, but freedom, a rephrasing that still stings across time. Next, we hear that line, then follow its echo through motives, morals, and the politics of labels. In salons and letters, a line is attributed to Empress Elizabeth, piercing, theatrical, and concise. She called the motive not madness, but freedom, a word that rearranges every ledger on the table. If the crime is desire for freedom, what sentence can power pronounce without confessing its fear? The phrase travels well because it fits the geometry: knight roots, aliases, and a chair's reverse deference. Ministers preferred diagnoses, poets preferred courage. Both simplified a life that refused neat categories. Attribution is debated, sources diverge. Still, the sentiment rings true to the century's nervous tempo. It names what etiquette could not: autonomy as threat, privacy as rival jurisdiction to cabinet and court. The line also reframes the photograph: not scandal, but sovereignty over one's posture and gaze. In that reading, the king's habits become petitions, and petitions become heresies to administrators of daylight. The immediate cost was swift: papers moved, keys changed hands, and a lake acquired two secrets. The longer cost lived in language, where labels like unfit outlived the men who wrote them. Could a monarch choose the terms of existence without forcing the state to choose its mask? That tension, between private truth and public choreography, built the double life that structured every hour thereafter. Which brings us to meaning, not rumor, what a parallel kingdom of night says about power. Next, we consider the ethics of darkness: who it protects, who it alarms, and why. Darkness is not only absence, it is infrastructure: roots, rooms, and rituals that select their witnesses. It preserves tenderness that daylight would monetize, and it shelters confidences from bureaucratic paper trails. What does a double life reveal when it runs long enough to acquire staff, schedules, and stone? It reveals that privacy competes with sovereignty, because both claim calendars, locks, and loyal interpreters. It shows how secrets breed economies: stipends for silence, pensions for discretion, and careers for professional forgetting. It also shows how enemies recruit metaphors, turning comfort into decadence and seclusion into derangement. Our caution stands: sources are partial, memories politicize, yet patterns emerge across receipts and choruses of whispers. Near consequence, the heart survives by narrowing its circle. Friends are chosen for stamina, not applause. Further consequence, the state learns to narrate absence as failure, then to legislate cures for inconvenience. The photograph collapses nuance into posture. The diagnosis collapses posture into policy. Both travel faster than truth. Could a different grammar, one that dignified privacy, have rescued the man without unseating the office? History hints that systems resisted. Rituals defended opacity. Reform required more than gentle letters and patience. And so the story ends where politics prefers it to, cleanly, while meanings keep walking after dark. Those meanings step with us into closing reflections, where images meet institutions and write tomorrow's headlines. Next comes the close: what changed, what it cost, and what the lens still decides. Begin with a chair and a glance, and you can redraw a kingdom's grammar. When images reverse deference, rituals falter. When rituals falter, paperwork accelerates to rescue appearances. If authority rests on choreography, what happens when a candid pose refuses the choreographer's cue? First, consequences arrive locally. Keys change pockets, diagnoses travel, and a lake inherits two brief biographies. Second, markets discover memory. Castles monetize wonder, and fantasy finally pays the bills that built it. Third, Language ossifies, eccentric becomes unfit, privacy becomes pathology, narrative outlives the people it organizes. Editors still argue motives, sources remain partial, yet one lesson is stubborn through the fog of archives. Power prefers labels, lives prefer nuance, photographs prefer neither, and therefore startle both into motion. The practical wisdom is unromantic. Protect autonomy early, on paper, not in whispered roots after midnight. Also, distrust cures that require sealed rooms and passive voices. Kindness should never need guards at doors. Would today's institutions fare better if confronted by an image that unsettles their favorite etiquette? Perhaps, if process is transparent, diagnoses are earned in person, and privacy is honored as a right. The legacy here is double: a tourism industry of breathtaking silhouettes and a caution about easy verdicts. Let the castles glitter, let the archives open, let the questions stay sharper than the postcards. And keep an eye on the small decisions: who sits, who stands, who chooses the hour of meeting. Because somewhere, another shutter will click, and a single pose may start the story all over again.